I wanted to take a couple of moments this evening to have a brief discussion about the appearance that Barack Obama made last night at the memorial service for the Arizona tragedy. First of all, as most people would, I think I would say that by and large, his conduct at the speech last night and his execution of it, in some ways was exactly what most Americans were looking for. It was an environment where we were expecting him to offer some level of comfort and strength and inspiration to the families of those who suffered through this horrible tragedy, and indeed all Americans who were horrified by this. And I think on that count, Obama delivered. It was a situation and an event that really played to his strengths. When Barack Obama can go into a situation where he can speak in very high-minded, broad, generalized, emotional terms, he is at his best. That's what he does better than just about anybody. And so in that kind of environment, it worked very well for him, and he shined in that type of moment. It seemed a bit like a stump speech on the campaign trail or a Democratic convention. And while I did kind of wonder at some points if the crowd reaction was appropriate for a memorial service, truth be told, I don't know how much of the blame for that I can lay on Obama and his handlers. I think a lot of that probably came from the people in attendance and the students that were there, and heck, it was their memorial service. If they wanted to cheer a little bit, I guess that's fine. I can't say I understand it, but that's what they want to do. That's fine. I won't castigate Obama for that. I'd say 85% of his speech was exactly what it should have been and exactly what Americans were looking for. But there was one part of the speech that I wanted to talk about a little bit and maybe take some issue with. And that was his repeated calls for bringing some civility to the debate politically in America. The idea that we should somehow disagree agreeably, as he so high-mindedly put it. Now, there have been those today, as I tape this for you the day after the speech on Thursday here, there have been those today who have come out and made the inference that that was a bit of a castigation of the left and a way of slapping the hand of all of those leftist pundits that immediately criticized Sarah Palin and the Tea Party and tried to link us to this debacle. But I don't know that I believe that. I think he was really saying that in a more general sense. And if he was, if we on the right were a part of the target of that statement, then I'd like to propose a question to Mr. Obama and to the other leftists. If we look at Barack Obama, from the time that he began running for office and his campaign up through the 2 years he's been in office, and looking strictly at some of the ideas he's championed, the legislation he's pushed, the things he signed into law, as well as the promises he made on the campaign trail and the type of America that he advocated, it's very clear that Barack Obama stands for significant change, for fundamental change. It's essentially what he ran on. Change was a word that you saw every 30 seconds during 2008. And I think that even in an environment where Obama is trying to some level to moderate himself a little bit and to move himself to the center just enough to get reelected in 2012, I think even in that environment, he would tell you if you asked him that he does stand for some level of fundamental change in our country. I believe he stands for fundamental change in the way we interact with the rest of the world, fundamental change in how Americans do business with each other economically, fundamental change in how we accept each other, fundamental change in all sorts of areas, fundamental change in terms of how the wealth in this country is distributed. I mean, after all, he did say that we should spread the wealth that he's on the campaign trail, which to me is still one of the most offensive things I've ever heard a president say, or presidential candidate. But it's pretty apparent to you that I don't agree with the type of change that Barack Obama stands for. Okay, well, that's pretty obvious. And we could probably do another presentation somewhere down the line where we detail my specific misgivings about it. But for tonight, for this one presentation, this one speech, this one lecture, let us set aside, we're going to set aside the disagreements I have with Barack Obama on the specifics of the change that he embraces. We'll get to that another time. What I'd rather talk about is the idea of change itself, the idea of implementing fundamental change, standing for fundamental change, advocating fundamental change, executing fundamental change. When that is what you stand for, when that is what you run on, and when that is what you govern in preparation for, or in terms of trying to execute, then it only stands to reason that when you're trying to bring fundamental change to a society or a nation, that you would think, and you would obviously encounter, a particularly strong level of resistance to that change. I mean, if you are trying to change a particular nation, and that change hasn't come before the time that you came about, then there must be some people that don't really want things to change. And so when you try and implement that change, those who disagree with you are going to try and defend, to the point of life and limb, what they feel is the status quo and what they feel has worked. In America in particular. I look at this, and many other people look at this as the greatest nation in the world. So when you're a politician that talks about wanting to fundamentally change it, it only stands to reason that you're going to get some people extremely upset with you. And that they're going to very heatedly, very vociferously, and in very inflammatory ways, oppose your change. They're not going to do it in an agreeable way. They're going to be very upfront with you. And I think that's what we've seen the American people do over the last couple of years. Now, does this mean that I think all change is bad? No. There's certain types of fundamental change I would like to bring to the nation. I would like this nation to abandon over time all of its social programs. I think we need to get out of Social Security. I think we need to get out of Medicare and all the other social programs we have and phase those out over a period of 20 years or so. But I also understand that if I pursued those types of change or try to implement those types of change, that I would encounter a very vociferous, a very straightforward, a very vehement type of opposition to those fundamental changes that I wanted to make. Now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue those changes. It just means that when you pursue fundamental change, you should expect to encounter heated opposition. That the opposition you encounter is not going to be agreeable, not going to be nice, not going to be parliamentary in their procedure. They are going to oppose you oftentimes to extreme levels. And just as Barack Obama is trying to bring fundamental change in his way, if I were to bring it in my way, I would get that same level of opposition from different people. So if we establish that, then it stands to reason that a politician or office holder who advocates fundamental change and tries to take action upon that belief is going to encounter a rather uncivil type of opposition. I think we all can agree on that. Whether that change is good, bad, or indifferent, significant change, the more significant the change, then the more significant the opposition is going to encounter it. That's human nature. That should be obvious. So, now that we go back to the speech last night, and we hear Obama's calls for civility in our political discourse, how can that really make sense? How can a man who advocates significant change to our society, and again, I'm not criticizing that change in this presentation, I will do that at a later time, thank you very much. But if you advocate the significant change that he does, then how on earth can you expect the political discourse in a country to remain at a calm, non-rhetorical level? A calm and even keel. That just can't happen. It simply can't happen. So, I have to wonder if Obama's comments last night were merely just paying lip service to what some in the country wanted to hear, or if he's trying to shame his opposition or otherwise restrict his opposition from the rather vehement, passionate, and in my mind justified rhetoric and opposition that we've had of him over the last 2+ years. Now, lest you think that it's unreasonable that someone like a Barack Obama, who proposes the radical change that he does, lest you think it's irrational for him to think that he could execute that change without encountering opposition, which indeed it is irrational to think that, but I honestly believe that he thinks he can get to that point. Now, it's unreasonable, we just established that, but I think he believes he can get to that point. Do you know why? Look back at the 20th century. Look back at the advance of big government through that century. And as I said in my last discussion about the need not to lower political rhetoric in this country, so many of the big government advancements, the things like Social Security, the things like the New Deal, the things like the Great Society, and then lesser things like the implementing of the Environmental Protection Association by Richard Nixon, who, don't get me wrong, he was a Republican, but he was no conservative. A lot of those big government things, even some of the things George W. Bush did with sending tons of money to Africa for AIDS, or spending tons of money in education, all of those big government things could be executed or were executed because the people, quite frankly, were apathetic. And so they didn't care enough to oppose those things as vehemently as they could. Now, I suppose we on the right are making up for lost time in some ways right about now. We see the disaster that most of the 20th century was, and we're trying to go about the long and arduous task of deconstructing many of those pillars of big government that were put into place. But Obama looks back at the 20th century, I believe, and thinks that there's some hope that if we can just get the American people distracted and get them to not care, not pay attention, then they won't oppose these things as vehemently as we are. But you, my faithful listener, know better. You know what they're up to. You understand that when Obama and his ilk call for civility, they are actually calling for apathy. They are actually calling for non-attention. They are actually calling for non-action for those of us who actually wish to defend this great nation and enhance it rather than change it. You know that. So don't fall for the clever wordsmith. Don't fall for the silver-tongued devil that you heard last night. Because you know our vehement rhetoric and opposition are there for very good reasons.